All right. Hello and welcome to another episode of Drive-In Double Feature. I'm Ryan.
I'm Nathan.
And this is the podcast where we talk about 2 movies a week every Tuesday and Thursday. But first, before we get into anything, we have a Patreon. Head on over to patreon.com/driveindoublefeaturpodcast. It's Nathan and I having a couple off-the-cuff conversations, playing a couple of games. Just something a little extra we want to give to those who are supporting us. It doesn't affect any regular content, but we appreciate you nonetheless.
Of course.
Yeah. But Nathan, this is a really special month. Now, we've done a special weeks before, but we haven't done a special month before. And I made the suggestion because to me, this actor personifies a decade, and I don't think there's many other actors you could say that about.
Mm-hmm.
And we are doing one of my favorite actors to watch, Burt Reynolds. We're doing a Burt Reynolds month, talking about nothing but Burt Reynolds all month long.
Oh yeah, this is going to be like a lesson to me because I feel like my education on Burt Reynolds is very, very low. So I'm actually really excited to get into this. I'm going to be a Burt freak after this month.
You're gonna hurt for Burt.
Hurt for Burt. Yeah, I'm gonna have a pin and everything. But
you're hurting for a Burton.
No, I promise I'm not. But no, anyway, Burt Reynolds, he definitely is just seems like a really cool dude, and unfortunately we lost him fairly recently. So I feel like this is a fitting tribute to the man's career, at least one of the most important parts of this man's career.
And what did you know about him prior to this?
Nothing really. I knew that he was a man's man. You know, my grandpa and my dad both like Burt Reynolds. They've seen his movies. I just know he's in a lot of car movies. I really don't know a lot about him. I just know of him because he's one of the most famous people of this era. I'll say that. He's very recognizable. He's got a very recognizable face. There's not a lot of people that look like him. Cool dude.
Now, did you see any of his other movies before this?
Let me that's a good question because I feel like I've seen some of them.
Well, I'm assuming the big one you've seen is Boogie Nights.
Yes, of course. I've seen Boogie Nights. He's really amazing in Boogie Nights. I grew up watching All Dogs Go to Heaven, but that's not really, I'm not going to say that's a Burt Reynolds movie.
Hey, no. I actually, so the whole reason that got me this idea, Nathan, was I was actually going back and watching clips of All Dogs Go to Heaven.
Really?
I'm like, you know what? Burt Reynolds is a good guy. Maybe we could stretch this out for a month.
That's funny. Yeah, All Dogs Go to Heaven was one I watched all the time as a kid. I really loved that movie. And then my grandparents talk about The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas all the time. They love that movie. That's a movie they love very dearly because I think they love Dolly Parton as well. Never seen it though.
And that movie is actually the first movie where the song "I Will Always Love You," the song from Bodyguard, that's where the song debuted before it was in Bodyguard.
Yeah, which is crazy. And then Whitney Houston took that song to a whole new heights after that.
Yeah, but Anyway, we'll talk about that for the Dolly Parton podcast, but.
Yeah, I mean,
maybe one day. But my personal experience aside, sorry,
I was about to say. Oh, and I've seen Shark. If you didn't know that already.
Oh yeah, well, no, I forgot all about Shark.
Yeah, I kind of did too.
No, but my personal experience, probably the first thing I remember from is All Dogs Go to Heaven, and then I saw Cop and a Half in theaters.
I've seen that too. Oh boy.
And but just going back, Deliverance, Smokey and the Bandit, Cannonball Run, Hooper, Sharky's Machine, a lot of other Burt Reynolds movies, and this one reason why I wanted to do this is just to kind of revisit some of my old classics that I love, and also to maybe potentially see some ones I haven't seen before, which we're going to be talking about one of those next time on Thursday. But today, we're going to be talking about 1972's Deliverance, directed by John Borman. And this is going to be a brand new one for you before we started this, right?
Yeah, it is. It's a brand new one. It's one of the most popular movies, like just as far as like I've heard of it. I know of it. I know the music of it, but I've just never gotten around to see this one. So it was an exciting one to get to.
Yeah, it's definitely one that people think of like American classics. I think it gets brought up a lot.
Yeah.
But just to kind of set the table beforehand, Burt Reynolds, he had grew up in Florida, born in Michigan, did a lot of plays, had a lot of bit roles on television, and did a lot of B movies, which we talked about one, Shark, which was less than stellar, but he actually got his big break on a TV show called Riverboat, and he hated being on that show because he clashed a lot with the leading star, and he left the show, which was like a big taboo thing to do back then. You weren't allowed, to leave a TV show back then. Now it happens all the time, but
yeah.
But back then that was seen as a big deal. He was on Gunsmoke for a little bit. But leading up to this, he had a bunch of like pilots for TV shows. And because of this, he had a lot of guest appearances on like The Tonight Show and Merv Griffin. And like and then all of a sudden he started getting all these acting roles because he was actually going on like these Tonight shows and late shows, and they're like, oh wow, this is actually a really super charismatic guy. He's got a great personality. And
yeah, and this is from an era where like going from like TV to movies was a big deal, much bigger than it was now. Like that was a much harder process to do.
And especially during that time too, like Johnny Carson and things like that. I was like can't miss TV. Like everybody's watching The Tonight Show. Like everyone's like gathering around to watch it. And at one point, he actually had his own gig opportunity to host his own Tonight Show, or host his own late show. And he actually did guest host The Tonight Show for a little bit. So,
interesting.
Yeah, and it kind of led up to this movie, which was his big breakout role.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, and I mean, this is like. What a movie, because it hit the popularity. Only cost $2 million, made $46 million the year it came out. A huge success. And yeah, I mean, if you look from his movies from before 1972 and after 1972, you see just how much his career blew up after that.
Yeah, it's really clear. I mean, and we're going to be talking. We're kind of going to go chronologically with his filmography. So. Where you can kind of see like we're going to be doing like a real steady climb until where he reaches like the pinnacle of his career. And with this though, with this movie Deliverance, like you said, it was real cheap production because at first like the studio was like, oh, okay, yeah, put two big stars in here, and there's a lot of conflicting reports about who John Boorman wanted in these roles initially, but from what they heard, from one of the reports was he wanted Jack Nicholson and Marlon Brando to be in Deliverance, with Jack Nicholson playing the John Voight role and Marlon Brando playing the Lewis role.
Holy crap. That'd be really interesting.
It would be. I'd like to see that, but when they got the budget, it was like, ooh, gotta cut down that budget there, buddy. And
Marlon Brando was like, I'm not going to read the script for this one. I'm just going to come in and do my own thing.
Yeah, or he was probably like, give me $40 million and I'm only going to work like for 30 minutes or something insane like that.
But no, I think having John Voight and Burt Reynolds gives this movie that little bit of flair it needs, honestly.
I think all four of the leads in this movie are good. I mean, they all play their parts really well, I feel like. But so like the four leads is Ronnie Cox and Ned Beatty, who those were the two most unknown at the time. This is their very first movie. They were just like regional actors at this point. Yeah.
Wow. And Ned Beatty is, he's in so many movies, especially in movies we cover on this show.
Oh, I know. He's got like a long history of being in movies. John Voight at this time had just been like in a real tumultuous production of All American Boy. He was basically ready to quit acting altogether until he was offered this role, and he credits it to saving his life and career. And
wow.
And and then at this point too, Burt Reynolds, like I said, he was kind of like a known unknown, where he was in a lot of these like bit roles. He was kind of like a character actor, like, oh hey, it's that guy type of
Yeah.
thing. So which is really funny to think about, considering he ended up being like the most bankable star of the 70s.
Yeah, it just that is funny, because like I didn't expect it. He's not really the main character here either. I always thought he was, which he's once again just like kind of. I mean, he's a big part, but not as big of a part as John Voight.
Yeah, John Boyd is clearly the star of the movie, but Burt Reynolds does have a lot of time to shine in this movie, and each character kind of has like their own moment where they have like a big scene stealing moment. Now, talking about this movie specifically, though, this movie started out as a book written by author James Dickey, who also wrote the screenplay to this movie as well.
Okay.
And so one thing I was going to cite is I listened to the audio commentary and I watched the documentary that was on the Deliverance Blu-ray, which I already owned prior to this. And it's kind of funny. Do you remember? So you remember the movie Tropic Thunder?
Yes. Yeah.
So you remember how like Nick Nolte played like the author or whatever and he turned out to be like this big fraud and like it didn't really live half of that stuff.
Yeah.
That's kind of what James Dickey was like.
Oh, wow. It was like kind of based on James Dickey. That's interesting.
I mean, I don't know if he was directly based off him, but it just reminded me a lot of that. So it was kind of like James Dickey was like this big boisterous person. He loved to tell stories, and he wrote the book Deliverance. And everyone said like what a character he was on set, and like just like he was so annoying, like wouldn't shut up. Like you'd call all the actors by their character names because he thought like he literally thought it was his movie. Like they were making like even though he wasn't directing or anything like that. And at one point they actually had to leave the set. Like they had to kick him off set for a while because he was so annoying. And it was funny because John Boorman shared a story where he went up to like John Boorman and he's like, all right, you got to keep a secret. Like, don't tell anybody. And John Boorman's, oh, okay, all right. And he said, just so you know, everything in that book happened to me.
Oh my God.
And John Boorman at first was like, oh my gosh, like, just kind of taken aback. And then he said like, at one point they got into a canoe and like James Dickey, like as soon as he got into the canoe, capsized it. And he's like, after that, I realized everything he told me was a lie.
That's funny. Why would you even like go around saying like, oh, Deliverance happened to me? Like that's just, you're opening up a whole can of worms. But getting into Deliverance, and I kind of want to talk about before we talk about the plot, how a movie this big, you have like preconceived like ideas of what it's going to be. Somebody who has never seen it.
Yes.
And I thought what I was getting was a rape revenge torture movie. Like it was going to be hyper violent. Because, everybody talks about the rape scene in this movie. That's like the biggest thing people take out of it, as well as the dueling banjos. And no, it's not really that. It isn't really that. That is a part of the movie. But I do think it's interesting. It's a good movie. It's a really good movie. But it is an exploitation movie. I wouldn't say it's anything above that. And I find that interesting that this is in the major canon of like American films. You know what I mean?
It is kind of funny. Yeah, no, I really wasn't kind of thinking that sort of mentality, but the way you phrase it, it's like, yeah, that does make sense. I mean, because we've talked about Hicksploitation movies before, like Eat My Dust, for instance, and it kind of is like that. It's kind of like a really well-made exploitation movie.
Yeah. No, it's very well made, but yeah, I was just like, okay, yeah, this is kind of in the same vein. If anything, I think it kind of kick-started the Hicksploitation genre. Like this is the kind of a movie that you could base off of that.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
I don't know. it's so funny you think of it like a Death Wish type of movie, which
Mhm.
it's like Death Wish, like on like in like a canoe, like in the woods or whatever. And
Yeah.
because I mean, I always remember that, but I don't think like I don't even remember seeing like the rape scene or even knew that the rape scene was coming like when I first watched it.
Really? Oh my God.
So it was when I watched it as when I was probably like 13 or something like that. It
Mhm.
was so shocking.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, I knew it was coming, so I like had something, but I because the scene in this it's hard to watch, man. It's tough. In the gritty way that only like 70s cinema seems to really bring out these type of scenes. And Ned Beatty in his first ever role, that is daring to do and very like open to be like, yeah, I will be a part of this scene.
Well, yeah, and sure. I mean, rape was around back then,
Of
but
course.
it's not like, but it was a lot of um, assault on women and like putting
Hmm.
women in all these like perilous situations. So this is like one of the first times, it happens to a man. So it's just kind of like, and this is kind of like that time period where men were not allowed to express their feelings or to become vulnerable in a way. And like you
Hmm.
said, this is, I mean, there's, you're leaving yourself wide open and you're just kind of putting yourself like out there and you're just like, this is going to be like the most vulnerable time like I can ever possibly make myself.
Yeah. But that's just getting it out of the way. That's not even the beginning of the movie. This comes in, I would say, probably about maybe halfway in that scene.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, because it starts out like as kind of like a little like a fish out of water type of story where it's like these
Yeah.
four guys that are from like the city are like, hey, we're gonna tackle that river,
Hmm.
and you don't really know what's gonna happen. I mean, there's kind of like this weird air of menace, like something's going to happen.
Yeah, it's like got a weird standoff vibe to it because they pull up to a gas station and they're kind of making fun of the hillbillies in the area, and the hillbillies seem very standoffish, but it also has a weird like lightness to it too because there's the iconic scene of the hillbilly boy playing dueling banjos with one of the guys on the team. The classic Sting plays over and over again. Great scene, by the way. Really great scene.
It is. It's a really memorable scene. In
Yeah.
fact, that another thing too is that John Borman, he had in his budget at one point a composer to do like an actual score to this movie, but
Mm-hmm.
that and he ended up losing that in the budget, and because of that, he just put dueling banjos over and over again in the movie, which I think it works.
I
It's like
think
one of
it does.
and he ended up like winning like a gold record. Like that song ended up going gold, and you heard it on the radio on the time afterwards. So
That's funny for this kind of movie to get like a song from it getting radio play. But I mean, I knew that little jingle, the before the movie. I even think I'm sure there's people out there that know that and don't even know about this movie.
well, that's just it's kind of like one of those classic things. Like like when you go to the beach, you think of the Jaws theme or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's like if you go to like a real backwoods type of area where it's just like, oh man, look at all these like weird country people, and then you start no 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 no. You think about that
Yeah,
in your head.
it's just one of those iconic things. But I actually like the reasoning behind them going in this canoe because I guess Burt Reynolds there is a really big nature freak, and they're getting rid of the river and expanding it into a lake for a dam. And so they're kind of exploring this river to like experience like a piece of America that's being destroyed. And I think that's I don't know. I guess I've never really seen anything like that in a movie. I think that's a really nice purpose, I guess.
Yeah, it's kind of like well, because when I first watched this movie, I was like I said, I was in my teens, so a lot of like minute plot points or like real talk heavy scenes were kind of going over my head because I'm more just like trying to, and especially after you see like that scene, you're like, oh my gosh, you kind of forget about all that stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
watching it now, I can kind of feel like I can dive more into it, and they explain why they're doing the boat trip. Like you said, that the whole river is going to just be turned into a dam, and like the whole town surrounding it is just going to be flooded at some point, and
Mm-hmm.
the whole town's going to die. And so it's kind of like this last like hurrah of the river, and it's like these four city boys like going out there and
Uh-huh.
just thinking that they're a lot better than these people. Like you said, Ned Beatty's kind of like acting like everybody's stupid, and
Yeah.
Burt Reynolds is kind of like a real show-offy type of guy, because they're at first like the two of the guys there in town, they're like they offer to they take their cars back to where they need to go to their final destination, and Burt Reynolds like kind of does some like real show-offy type of stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
so their confidence level is like super high at this point.
Yeah. And that kind of bites them in the ass in the end. But I guess what I find interesting is, especially after hearing what you've said about the director during the commentary, I feel like this movie almost like it kind of is like, hey, maybe these areas are okay to be destroyed. Let's get rid of cities and towns like this because they're full of bad people. I don't know. It's interesting.
Well, like you don't really think about that stuff, but they do say lines in this movie where it kind of that almost seems like the message, where because there's
Yeah.
even one guy later in the movie, like when they get to the town at the very end, that he said this whole town's going to be drowned, the best thing to ever happen to this town.
Mm-hmm.
And or like the sheriff at the end, who's also played by James Dickey, the screenwriter.
Oh, wow. I
And
didn't know that. Interesting.
at the end of the movie says too, he's like, I just want this town to die a peaceful death. So
Mm-hmm.
it's it's so weird. It is kind of just I don't know if they're just trying to say like it's got like a dark history to it or what, but
Yeah.
there's some type of underlying theme in there.
Yeah, yeah. I might be digging a little too deep into Deliverance. I don't know, but once they do get going in the river, I don't know. It feels kind of it's a movie that just takes such a dark turn so fast because it is really light for a little bit. It's like, oh, we're canoeing together, kind of having some banter together, yelling at each other and stuff.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what did you think of all the stuff leading up to the
Yeah,
scene?
I thought it was good. I thought it was like almost a little adventure movie in a way. And when they're doing these canoe scenes, it looked very real and it just looked really nice. The setting, all the trees and everything. I thought it was fun would be the word.
Yeah, it's like it's kind of like a river rafting adventure. You don't know it's going to turn dark. I mean, you think like, I guess maybe if you went in 100% blind, you might think like, oh, like these guys might try to the hillbillies might come and try to harm them or whatever. At most, maybe you're
Mm-hmm.
kind of thinking that in the back of your mind, but you're not really thinking of what end up happening is going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
John Borman said like when they were picking out the location, the problem is that it was like a lot of the rivers looked too nice, like it was too pristine. And if you're watching the movie, like a lot of the colors are desaturated, so it's trying to make it like not look. It makes a lot like all the greens look really muted, and
Mm-hmm.
like the river itself that looks kind of like more grayish than like a real crystal blue type of look.
Gotcha. They were going for like they're in like dirty country, like gross. Okay. I definitely got that vibe. I can tell you
Yeah,
that. Yeah, it's definitely gross, especially when they do get off into the woods. The whole woods look pretty nasty. But yeah, no, I think the environment looks nice, but has like this griminess to it. Very, very real, I guess. It doesn't have a movie look to it. It looks like a real deal.
yeah, I think so. And then, like you said, it starts out fun-ish, and then it really does go from like 0 to 100, like just like that. I mean, you're
It's
kind
one
of
of
think
those movies.
because they encountered the two hillbillies, and you're thinking they might rob them, they might beat them up or something like that. But it's a lot worse. I mean, like we said earlier, I mean,
Hmm.
they tie up John Voight and they rape Ned Beatty, and he does and probably one of the most iconic lines in a movie ever, which is so weird, but it's like this scene, it's like one of the most iconic lines is, squeal like a pig, and he makes like the little pig noises.
Yeah, the squeal like a pig line. I can't think of any right now except for South Park, but that line's been in so many things. I know it has.
It's been in a lot.
Yeah, which is very interesting that we would pull that out of this whole scene. It's hard to watch. It is. I think there's like, just because he's yelling this and Ned Beatty's trying to climb away. He's just in his underwear climbing up like muddy hills. It's, yeah, you really feel that. And I like that Ned Beatty and Jon Voight are kind of the two that actually, from this, they're the ones that get the blunt of everything, the brunt of all of the violence, and they get to survive in the end pretty much. I know that's a spoiler, but Burt Reynolds survives, but there is another character who ends up dying from all this.
Yeah. And it's such an iconic scene, and the line that he says, "Squeal like a pig,"
mm-hmm.
that's another story on the set, is that wasn't the original line for that scene. And in actuality, he was saying a lot more vulgar things, like he was dropping F-bombs and things like that, but they knew that this movie would play on television at a point. So, that's how they do a lot of TV edits of movies, that they'll film alternate takes where they'll say like alternate lines.
Yes, yeah.
And that was the television take, the squeal like a pig line.
But they were like, this is too good to not keep it.
Pretty much, yeah.
That's awesome. That's really cool. And look, this movie's memory still lives on in that line, the line that almost wasn't in the movie.
It's, yeah.
Yeah.
And then the scene ends in a murder. Burt Reynolds shows up afterwards and murders one of the one of the hillbillies.
Yeah.
And it kind of takes off.
Yeah. From there, it's a movie about them trying to just cover their tracks and survive, because they have to think about, one, that they can't be caught for this, otherwise they're going to prison, and two, there's other people out there that are going to find out and try to murder them along the way. So it's almost like a paranoia in the middle of a river movie, and what a change in pace.
Well, yeah, and because one of the hillbillies survived and he ran off, so they know that there's at least somebody that knows what they did is out there.
Yeah.
And they kind of had like a little debate on what they should do, and the character Drew, aka Ronnie Cox, was the only like outlier of like, no, we should turn ourselves in. And I was trying to think of like what I would do in that situation.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess you really don't know until you're actually faced with that sort of thing. I mean,
yeah.
But do you have an opinion of what you would do in that situation? Or
God, no, that's so tough, right? To be there in the middle of the woods, because effectively you could bury that body and probably it's a hillbilly no one probably cares about. They probably aren't connected to the cops. You could get away, but you would have to live with that guilt for the rest of your life,
But at the same time, I knew like what Burt Reynolds was saying, where it was like, if they do go to trial, then they're probably going to be judged by a jury of the hillbillies' peers, not one of their own, and they would be judged pretty harshly. Despite it was justifiable. I mean, it was self-defense.
That was self-defense. That's what it was, because he shot him because he was putting Jon Voight and Ned Beatty in a horrible situation. It wasn't unwarranted. And that kind of, I like that sets forth the rest of the movie, because a hillbilly does end up attacking them, and Jon Voight kind of has to go take them on. This is after Burt Reynolds gets hurt really badly and is kind of out of commission for the rest of the movie.
Yeah, it's it's funny because this is considered like his big breakout role, but I mean, he's pretty much on the sidelines for like almost half the movie, at least a third of it.
Yeah, he is. But I think why he's still like a big breakout star, this because he still has charisma, he still has the look. His outfit in this absolutely iconic outfit. So
Well,
it makes sense.
and it's kind of like going with that archetype that we were kind of talking about, like in Billy Jack, where he was. That's kind of like that man's man type of character. I mean, like I said, like the other three characters are like suburban dad type of characters, where they're
Mhm.
just kind of like, yo, yeah, we're just out here to have fun, and we don't really know what we're doing.
Yeah.
And Burt Reynolds is like taking it super seriously, like this is like about survival. And it's so funny too, like he talks about stuff about the system is going to go down and we're going to have to live like survivalists, which people are still talking about that today, like 50 years
Yeah.
later.
50
Like
years later. Yeah.
it's like people are waiting for like this big grid to fall, but it hasn't happened yet.
Hmm.
And but
Oh, yeah.
it's just
Sorry.
funny that people back then were still talking about that sort of thing.
Yeah, people were kind of doomsday, like watching that even back then. I guess it's something that's always going to stay with people. But I just realized this movie came out July 30th, and this episode's going to come out right at the beginning of August. Right, we'll be right at the 50th anniversary of this movie.
That's so weird because we did that too. Friday the 13th came out like the exact same, like for like the 42nd anniversary or whatever it was.
Yeah, yeah, and that's cool. So yeah, I guess we're kind of celebrating that as
Well,
well.
all right, 50 years of Deliverance, everybody. We made it.
Yeah, hey, we're still talking. Yeah, woo, we did it. I just looking. This movie is in the National Film Registry. I almost want to take a look. This might be one of the few movies that we've watched on here that's in the National Film Registry for being like an important movie.
You don't think Barbarian Queen is in the National Film Registry?
Yeah, yeah, right next to Yurosuke Doji. Right, yeah.
Yep, and between that and Hot Box.
Yes. Oh, the Hot Box has got to stay.
Uh,
We aren't celebrating Hot Box's 50th anniversary. Okay.
oh, I can't wait.
Yeah. But
Um, well, so one thing I did want to talk about, because one part that did confuse me as a kid, and now it kind of made a little more sense, was the one character, Drew. He was like the only outlier, like I said, that wanted to turn themselves in, and because that his friends actually agreed to do that, he's kind of like becomes like a shell of himself, where he just doesn't. He's not even coherent or anything. And there's one point where he falls out of the boat and you don't really know for sure what happened. I mean, Burt Reynolds says that he was shot,
mhm.
but later they find his dead body and they're like, "Oh, I don't see any bullet wounds." So it
Yeah, I guess you're right. Yeah, I guess I don't know. Did they explain it?
they don't. But what I took away from it and what I was kind of reading from like interviews and stuff is that he committed suicide, and
Oh,
like he just didn't even want to be a part of it. He was horrified that his friends did like that. He couldn't live with the conscience of having like a dead body on him, so
yeah.
he just killed himself, just threw himself into the river.
Dang, that's really sad. Um, so I guess that makes sense. So he didn't. It wasn't bullet, but he just threw himself in because the water's pretty raging.
And they don't say that definitively, so I mean, I think it's more of like it's left up to your interpretation of what happened.
Mm-mm.
I think that's kind of more so what they want to do. And there's another scene too that's kind of confusing, because later in the movie, like you said, John Voight climbs up to the top of that cliff, which, by the way, before we get into any further of that, I do like this movie a lot, but that is some of the worst day for night shots I've ever seen in a movie.
Thank you. Thank you. I was watching this scene and I was like, wow, this looks bad. Like it looks really bad, man. I don't know what it is. It like you said, it's a good movie, but that scene, I just don't think it works very well.
It looks awful. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
amateur hour type shit, like stuff that
Yeah.
like that like you or I could make like today and just put like a terrible filter on.
Exactly. And I was scared that the rest of the movie was going to be like this. Luckily, this is just one scene in this movie.
Yeah, but it looks
Yeah.
really bad. John Borman says like, well, he went on this really long rant about how movies are made with computers now and all that, and anyway, he's like, we just worked with what we had, and this is the best we could do. And I'm like, was it really though? Like,
Yeah, I don't know. I guess he would complain about his low budget again. Yeah, it was low budget.
well, whatever. But anyway,
No.
putting that aside, that's my biggest gripe with the entire movie. But anyway, they encounter a hillbilly. They're not sure if it's the hillbilly, the one they're looking for, and because he doesn't have his hat on, he looks a little different,
Mm-hmm.
and ends up with a confrontation with John Voight, and John Voight does kill him with a bow and arrow. And at first, he kind of, because one key trait of that hillbilly is that he didn't have any teeth, but when he opens up the hillbilly's mouth, he's got teeth in him, but he has like little dentures in, so it's like it may or may not be him. And
Yeah.
so I was kind of confused at first when I watched this when I was younger, thinking, I was like, did they kill the wrong guy? Or
Yeah. And it's kind of like leave it up to your own interpretation kind of deal again. I think adding to that paranoia, because after this scene, they do make it back, and it's kind of like they have to lie to the cops, and they have a story, and they have to kind of figure out what they can lie about, what they can't lie about, and that outlier if someone could be out there that knows, it's kind of scary. And that's a big part of the movie. The ending of this is long.
it's very long. I mean, but I actually really liked the town scenes and stuff. I thought it I liked the way they were shot and how they looked.
Yeah, no, I think it's good. I feel like a lot of movies would have just ended on return and been like, oh, we did it. We made it out. But this one deals with like the implications of like all the crap that went down.
And that's where Warner Brothers wanted the movie to end. They wanted it to end with them pulling up like the riverbank and like, we made it. We're safe now. And but that's and not real life. For real life, it'd be like, no, you got to deal with the stuff that just happened. And they do lie to the police. John Voight's character and Ned Beatty's character argue a lot because they're trying to get their story straight. John Voight thinks that Ned Beatty betrayed them and told them the truth, but that didn't happen. And like the sheriff and the deputy, I guess, was related to one of the hillbillies that was murdered. And they said like he hasn't come back yet. And so I think it's kind of implied that the sheriff and the deputy believe that they knew that they killed those guys, but they didn't have any hard evidence.
Yep, that's definitely the way it ended. It ended off on the very boys, we don't want you back here in town ever again. You're going to get away with this, but you cannot come back ever. We won't let it happen. Which I think is interesting because there's a lot of scenes of them lying, and I really loved John Voight and Ned Beatty both are acting the hell out of these scenes. You really can tell. It's really interesting. I watching this movie, Ned Beatty, who was the most vulnerable in this, he was the one who got violated. I feel like, and you would think he wouldn't be the stronger of the two. He ends up being much stronger than John Voight in my eyes, as far as like under the pressure cracking. It felt like John Voight was having a harder time than Ned Beatty, which I found very interesting.
Well, yeah, I that's true because Ned Beatty, he's like kind of keeping it together, even though he's probably the one that should have the most PTSD from this. And John Voight is like, he's having an emotional breakdown. Like when he just even gets like during dinner, like when like a nice family offers him dinner and he just starts like having an emotional breakdown. And Ned Beatty's like, this corn's really good though.
He just ignores him completely.
I said that in my notes. I'm like, they're just this guy's like breaking down and nobody's acknowledging it.
Yeah. I thought that was funny. Another really good scene in this ending sequence is them talking to Burt Reynolds, trying to tell them that they changed their story to the cops. And then like the cop is there listening, so they have to figure out a way to tell Burt Reynolds without telling him specifically. Thought that was a really, really solid scene.
I like that too, because Burt has no idea what's been going on with John Voight and Ned Beatty, and then when like the police question him, he's just immediately like, I don't remember a thing.
Yep, I forgot everything. He got off easy.
Yeah. But the very last scene where before the sheriff, I really, really liked Ned Beatty's and John Voight's like final conversation where they're kind of deciding of like what to do with Drew's family. And Ned Beatty kind of says to John Voight before he leaves, he's like, "Hey, I don't think I'm going to be seeing you for a while." Like, and which I kind of took as like they probably, in my mind, they've never interacted with each other ever again.
That's what I would say, and that's what it felt like. They didn't even give a goodbye or anything. It was literally just, "I won't be seeing you again for a while," and that was it.
It's such a really good scene. I really like that.
Yeah, I think Warner Brothers, if they decided to end it earlier than this third act, it would be a much different movie.
At that point, it would be like a true exploitation where it's just kind of like, we did it, we beat the bad guys, movie over.
Yeah, I think it wouldn't be remembered in the same way, in the same vein. Now that I'm talking about it, now I'm realizing why it does kind of rise above like some of its contemporary exploitation movies because of that scene. It has, okay, this happened, but what happens after? What's the tragedy here? What really is happening out of everything?
I would agree with you, though. It does sort of start out that way, but it does. But like that, like I said, like that last third is kind of what sets it apart from everything. But they do. We've talked about this in Friday the 13th. They do like a hand coming out, like John Voight's home with his wife, and everything's starting to become okay, and then he has like a dream where one of the dead man's hands comes out of the water.
Yeah.
And he wakes up like, oh.
Of course they had to do it. But I mean, here it makes sense because this is just like, oh, John Voight never is okay from this day on. He's going to always live with this on his conscience.
That's pretty much what they say. He's going to be thinking about this pretty much every day. And I really like the end shot too, like the water, and it's kind of like real menacing and foggy, and you're kind of waiting for something else to pop out or whatever, and it doesn't. But yeah, if you couldn't tell, I love this movie a lot. It's a really high recommend for me. I think this is a movie you owe it to yourself to watch.
Yeah, no, it's a really good movie. I'm happy that I've seen it. And if you're one of the few that have missed this movie, definitely check it out. It's worth watching. It's really, really good stuff. Probably one of the best movies of the 70s, one of the better ones to check out.
Absolutely. Yeah. But Nathan, what's the next Burt movie we're going to be talking about on Thursday?
All right, so the next Burt movie is that we're talking about. It's from 1973. We're talking about White Lightning, and this one actually stars Burt Reynolds. So I'm excited to get into that.
Yep, and that one is free on Tubi, so feel free to check it out along with us. If you'd like to email us, talk about Burt Reynolds or any other thoughts, opinions, email us at driveindoublefeaturpodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter at DIDFpod, and once again, please check out our Patreon at patreon.com/driveindoublefeaturepodcast. But until next time.